All right, you guys, we're going to pause the GI discussions for one video because I do want to address something that I've been hearing from my patients a lot recently since the pandemic about their discomfort and upset around the high carbohydrate and sugar cravings since being in pandemic and being stuck at home. Most importantly, there's this element of people feeling like bad about themselves because they feel like they don't have willpower over these cravings, and I want to debunk that myth. I want to debunk this concept that during stressful situations that we just don't have willpower and therefore we're terrible and we can't, achieve our goals and all of these things. So that's not the case. There's a very real physiological reason why our bodies crave carbohydrates and sugar, which is a form of carbohydrate, and even some fats when we're in a high stress situation. So before we get into the details about that, I do want to give you a quick lesson about what happens in your body when we have a stressful situation happen. So for a moment, I want you to imagine you're in a haunted house and something comes out of the dark and scares you, and you have that moment of your heart pounding and racing, you have your palms that get sweaty, and you have this moment of panic, right? And that fight or flight mode, that panic is the fight or flight mode, and that's the release of a hormone called epinephrine in our body. It's the very first hormone that's released when we're in a chronic stressful situation, and it actually not only prepares us to make that decision to either fight or stay and fight, but it also decreases our appetite for the moment because our body is is preparing to use all of our energy to go into battle, right? If the stress persists, so say it's not a haunted house, you're actually, in a situation where the stressful incident continues, like what we're in right now with COVID-19 and the pandemic, suddenly we get an influx of cortisol, which is another hormone that comes into our system that helps to balance out the epinephrine. And what cortisol does in our system, it actually increases our appetite to help replenish the nourishment that our body needs, again, in preparation for a long-term battle. But what happens in chronic stress, when the stress does not go away, cortisol keeps building in our system. It keeps building and building and building, and our body doesn't have time to filter it back out. And when we have a surge of cortisol in our system due to chronic stress, we do have increased appetite, and it can lead to over the long term, can lead to a variety of really harmful chronic health conditions, including heart disease and kidney disease and depression, and all sorts of things, and weight gain, because cortisol does increase our appetite, right? So knowing this, the hormonal component in our body, why do we crave carbohydrates and sweets and fat? What is that? So when we are stressed, again, our body is preparing to output a lot of energy. So it needs our brain is in strategy mode. We're trying to figure it out. So our brains are needing a lot more energy. We can actually utilize up to 12% more energy during stress than without. So we actually physically need more calories to fuel our system. So there's that one component, that we actually do need more calories when we're in a stressful environment. But number two, carbohydrates and sugar especially, and fats to a certain extent too, they actually help to release another neurotransmitter hormone called serotonin. Serotonin is what we call the feel-good hormone that comes into our brain. It makes us feel good. It calms us down. It gives us those feelings of happiness and elation. They actually trigger that in our brain, but it's only temporary. Once it triggers it, it goes right back down, especially when you're eating, very refined forms of carbohydrate and fat. It can spike your levels and then drop you right back down and make your feelings of anxiety and stress a little bit worse. So it's kind of a little bit of a vicious cycle. But all of that said, my best advice when you are in a stressful situation, especially when it's a chronic stressful situation. Right now, with the pandemic and COVID-19, our whole community, our collective whole, is in a chronic stress situation because of this external factor that we cannot control. We're in this situation, and we're adjusting to new patterns of living. Okay, so we're home more often. We're trying to not only work from home, but we're also trying to adjust to this being closer to our kitchens and feeling, triggered by needing to snack all day long, and also we're just generally stressed about money and our jobs and the health and well-being of ourselves and our family. So we're craving these things. We're craving carbohydrates and sweets to help quell the nervousness and anxiety that's in our brain. So my best advice, number one, cut yourself some slack. You are in an unprecedented situation, and maybe, if you're watching this video past the pandemic, I still think this applies to you. Cut yourself some slack first and foremost, because when we are stressed, that's a very real emotion, a real chemistry happening in our body. So if you are give your body what it needs right now, because it could need the energy, and maybe that is a quick form of comfort that helps quell that fire initially. So that's my first recommendation. And also, when we, in our brains, if we say, this is a bad food, or, I shouldn't be eating this, suddenly you'll notice, and this goes for the rest of your life too, you'll notice that you start to crave it more. So starting to demystify in your brain that the certain foods are bad for us, or that we shouldn't, or they're guilty pleasures or whatever, get rid of that, because the second we categorize that in our brain, we will want it more. So go ahead and have it. Stop feeling guilty about it. Just enjoy it while you're eating it. And then eventually you will start to learn the patterns of shopping more effectively at the grocery store that doesn't include only shelf-stable food, which tend to be carbohydrate and sugar heavy. You'll start to figure out your system of buying the fresh produce and buying the fresh whole grains that will fuel your body. Because when you fill your pantry and your kitchen with those things that are good for you, you're more likely to eat them. So that's a really good strategy to have on hand. Also, fill your kitchen and pantry when you're able to buy fresh produce with as many colors as you can, because I talk about this a lot, but all those different colors, they're all phytonutrients that our body needs. And when you give your body what it needs, when you give them all those nutrients and vitamins, it will relax. It's like, oh, I don't have to hoard onto this thing because I don't know when it's going to come back again. And that's the same thing for these quote unquote bad foods. If you give it to them, if you give it to your body, it's like it doesn't feel like it needs to hold on, and that holding tension is a form of stress and inflammation internally inside of our body. So give it what it needs. Try to apply this concept of eating in addition to. So if you feel like you need to eat the cookie and the cake and the chips and whatever, go for it. Eat the cookie, cake, chips, and cake, but also eat your vegetables and your protein and your whole grains, because that is what's going to give your body the fuel that it needs, right? So just give it what it needs in addition to anything else you may feel like you need for comfort, right? As a very quick aside, when I say go ahead and eat the cake and cookies in addition to your food, I am not saying that this is a long-term strategy. It's certainly not a long-term strategy. Stress needs to be managed, because excess calories, excess sugar, all of these things also over the long term accumulate and can cause long-term health conditions. And this is a note especially true if you already have a chronic health condition like diabetes or heart disease, for instance, where certain nutrients like sugar and salt need to be monitored carefully. This is something that you will really need to talk to your healthcare practitioner about, talk to your registered dietitian, get your team of healthcare folks around you to support you during this time too. And the last piece of advice, or the second to last piece of advice, is to start to administer this mindful eating. Take a little bit more time when you eat. Think about where your food's coming from, touch it, feel it, play with it, kind of engage, don't start playing with your food a little bit more. It engages this childlike essence in us. So play with it, smell it, taste it, put your fork down in the middle of a meal and give yourself time to breathe. You know, give yourself, take a little bit more time, be more mindful about what you're eating. And lastly, really, and I know this might seem like a big concept, but the only real way to manage chronic stress, which our society lives in chronic stress, is to eliminate the sources of stress. So, and I know that that's a convoluted answer because we don't always have control over the sources of stress that we have in our life. And that's not what I'm talking about, because there's always going to be external factors that we can't control. But you can control your diet, you can control your lifestyle, and you can add more play and more self-care into your lifestyle. Those are all things you can control. So add more playtime, add more arts and crafts, add more exercise, do things that make you happy. That's going to help reduce your stress level and give your body time to catch up. So I hope this helps. Don't judge yourself. Don't be upset if you have been indulging those cravings during this time. It is hopefully a very temporary situation for us, and our body is having a very real chemical reaction to all the stress, and that's something that is very outside of willpower. So don't feel so bad. I hope this helps. Good luck, you guys.